batia 4 horas de manhã, 4 horas de tarde. Comecei a sentir que a bola fazia realmente uma curva de 2 metros, 2,5 metros.
Welcome to episode 79 of Folha Seca. Today, I'm thrilled to host Hugo Scheckter, founder and managing director of the Player Care Group. He was a player liaison officer at Southampton, head of player care at West Ham, and interim head of player care and welfare at Brentford, this time in parallel with his work in his company across consultancy roles at multiple clubs. Hugo, welcome to Folha Seca.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks a lot for coming. Just to start, there's a big disagreement in the player care community about which club was the first to appoint a player care manager, as it's called today in English football, among other names. Around the 2000s, Lorna McKelland at Aston Villa or Bill Ellaby at Everton, depending on whom you ask, are often credited as the first player care managers. Anyway, the fact that someone like you, who graduated in 2013, has become a leading figure in the field shows how young the player care industry still is, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not something that I had even really heard of growing up, and it certainly wasn't a dream of mine to work in player care. And it actually wasn't even when I started working in football, it wasn't really my goal. But a job opened up at Southampton. I'd interned there before, and they thought I had the right expertise or the right sort of personal skills to be able to go and fill that role. And so they asked if I wanted to do it. I was actually really unsure at the beginning, but ended up agreeing to do it. And yeah, haven't looked back since. But when I joined Southampton in 2014, we think we're the 12th or 13th club in the Premier League to have this role. Now 19 of the 20 Premier League clubs have a player care department. So it's grown massively, but yeah, very, very new and very, very young still in the industry.
If you ask 20 people at 20 different clubs what player care is, you'll likely get 20 different answers, as you say, and that's exactly why you love it. Its variety across countries like the US, Germany, and England is linked to how recent the concept is. Still, you have your own perspective, and I just would like to ask you to break it down because I know that you usually break it down into three main corners of a triangle. So could you just please elaborate a bit on this so that people that are watching or listening to us could understand a bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. So we try to, over my years working in the industry, I observed a lot of different people, met a lot of different people. And when I started teaching player care, I wanted to try and have some way to compartmentalize how different people approach the job. So what I found is there's kind of three main corners, and we put it into a triangle because a lot of people are between one or more of the corners. There's the operational player care, which is solving problems, a lot of sort of the logistics of moving people around, solving problems for them, the kind of more day-to-day player care stuff that people think of. Then there's the personal developmental role, which is giving young people or even older people, I guess, also the skills to be able to solve problems for themselves. So it could be through workshops, it could be through one-on-one teaching, it could be through formal education. Tends to be more in the academy, but also has a role in adult football as well. And then the welfare side, which is either signposting to the appropriate mental health resources, working through personal qualifications such as counselling or psychology, and just kind of looking after the person, the player as a person rather than as a player necessarily. And it's kind of the third corner of it. So it's three different sides of it. And I think what we say is that everyone within player care falls somewhere within that triangle. Personally, I'm much more operational, but make sure that if I'm building a department or helping a club build a department, that they have all the three corners covered, which is important.
You, all in all, you recognize that definitions of player care can vary. When people think of a player liaison, for example, they often picture the traditional role, like that kind of fan who's been at the club for ages, handling day-to-day issues and solving problems as they arise. While you accept that a reactive approach is a good starting point, you focus on teaching clubs to be more proactive. So kind of solving a problem once to prevent it from recurring. For you, this proactive model where the team not only solves problems but also prevents them is really the key difference. The reality is there's no universally agreed upon definition, right? Like, for instance, we know that in Europe it's often called team manager, a role that, while slightly different, often covers player care, right? So
Hmm.
these kind of differences are also kind of linked with your passion for the role, and this kind of just explaining to clubs how to be more proactive and how to solve problems beforehand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's been around for 20 something years in England, but a lot of clubs in other countries, it's still not even existing at all. And I was recently in Portugal meeting with a club there, and they have a team manager, but they also have a player. They call it the families department, and that's quite interesting because a lot of clubs don't have it. A lot of clubs in Europe are still relying on the team manager who has all the operational duties for the first team, and then will try and help with the players and the families where they can. But without having a specific priority on it, it's hard to do, a full job in both regards. I've done both jobs. I've done both jobs at the same time, and I know how hard it is. So, yeah, it's certainly not easy, but the more proactive a club can be, solving problems before they come up is always going to be better. But it requires a larger resource and also a element of planning and understanding of what's going to be the issues and doing that. So, yeah, hard to get there, but when you get there, it makes it much easier for everybody for sure.
And also, player care has changed massively over the past decade. Last season, 19 Premier League clubs had player care in their first teams, if I'm not mistaken, with some departments having indeed 6 to 7 people. For you, the main priorities for clubs are improving performance and spending more efficiently off the pitch, and player care can help clubs reducing costs and may likely indirectly boost performance. There is this kind of example that you usually mention, that if a club spends 50 million pounds on a player who struggles to settle and is later sold for 30 millions, they would lose 20 million. So this means that, like, it would pay for maybe hundreds of years or decades of
Mhm.
just the player care department itself. So basically, player care also minimizes this kind of financial risk for supporting player integration, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve problems either before they come up or as they come up. And I'm not naive to think that clubs will do this always for the right reason, or because they want the players to be happy. Sure, they might want the players to be happy, but that's why we try and frame everything in sort of a financial mindset and also a performance mindset, because that's what often matters most to people running clubs. So yeah, we've got a number of examples, and what we're trying to say to clubs is this isn't just a money going out. It's a way to invest in player retention, player onboarding, and trying to minimize the chances of players failing as much as possible.
There's a really a funny image that you usually that you also mentioned in the past, that is like spending 50 million pounds on a player without investing in player care is like buying a Lamborghini and filling it with diesel instead of premium fuel, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, yeah, and it's right. It's like at the training ground, the player has so many resources to look after them. But if they're not happy off the pitch and the family aren't happy, then they're never going to work. So a lot of times you're spending the money up front on the big asset, i.e., the Lamborghini. But if you don't give it the proper maintenance and fill it with the right fuel and make sure it has somewhere to park, then it's not going to be a very successful purchase overall. So yeah.
And actually, like, even before a player is signed, playing player care can get to work. Like, you admit, you'd often have a Sky Sports news on during the transfer window, and usually followed social media to get to know players the club was linked with, even if it was just gossip. There's always this kind of, let's say,
Mhm.
risk.
Yeah.
You'd also check, like, with scouts on the nationalities of incoming players, so you could start preparing their welcome package in the right language as early as possible. And the truth is, it's a two-way relationship, like right, like, you'd also assist with transfers by supporting players deciding between a couple of clubs, like selling them the lifestyle of the city, where the school for their kids, this kind of stuff, where they could live in. So could we say that player care should work closely with the recruitment team?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more closely you can work with other departments, the better. I mean, We try and help the player decide, on stuff off the pitch, because sometimes or oftentimes the player's never been to the town that the club is in or the city, maybe not even the country. And so there can be a lot of worry and a lot of fear about what's life going to be like, especially if they've never left their home country. So we're trying to show them what life will be like, that it's a good experience, that someone will be looking after them. And that often helps, them choose us, the club that I'm at with versus a club that doesn't have proactive player care like this. And so we see that a lot, but it's about trying to answer questions before they come up. It's about maybe answering the questions of the partner or the parents or whoever it is, who is their most important person, and how can we convince them that our club is the right place for them. So yeah, absolutely, trying to get that information as quickly as possible is important. Though also being ready to sort of adapt quickly if something changes very quickly or a last minute deal comes in. Sometimes you don't get that luxury of knowing when something's going to come in. So then you have to be ready to adapt and hit the ground running.
Hugo, we will get back to this at some point of our conversation. But would you say that is there any kind of more important department or departments, in your opinion, to which player care managers should be more closely to, or do you think every department has its own weight on this kind of relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've always been most close with the medical team, because if you have players who are long-term injured, they often need support off the pitch. It's good for us, as well as for us to understand what are they doing, what's they going through, because sometimes I wouldn't know about an injury from the game or something, and I might say, oh, okay, we're going to go do this tomorrow, and then actually no, I've had an injury, so it's important to have good relationships. But ultimately, like, every club works best if everyone's on the same page, on the same operating the same direction. And so often, my role would be not only player care, but also kind of trying to organize the departments internally. So let's have even having sometimes having a weekly meeting or a daily meeting is something that club wouldn't do automatically, but actually really important to hear from the person doing the jerseys, the kit manager. I heard a player say this, and then maybe it's something we need to look after. Or the masseurs tend to be very much people that the players speak to. They can have really good information. So if you can work both ways with as many people as possible, you get all the information, you can make the right decisions and support people in the right way. So yeah, you're going to need everyone at any point. And so how do we have that best relationship as possible is really important.
With the various departments of a club, for let's take maybe the example of the medical department, uh, were you used to schedule any frequent meetings, or was it more on an on-demand basis, let's say?
Well, you try and have the formal meetings, but I think for me, what I would always try and do when I'm in a club is just be a presence at the training ground. So when the players are training, or maybe when the players have left, it's normally quite quiet. Walk around every department, knock on the door, say hello, have a quick chat. At lunchtime or breakfast, sit at a different table, not with your team, but with other staff members or other players, because it's in those informal conversations that often you get the best information, because someone remembers something, or they're telling a story, and then you think, that makes sense with this information I know. So I'm a big believer in having informal conversations as often as possible, but having that formal meeting set up as well, so that between the two of them you catch everything up without trying to go over the top as well, because sometimes you can get kind of stuck in too many meetings. But I think not only the departments at the training ground is important, but also departments at the stadium. So the commercial department, the ticketing department, the merchandise department, the accounts department, understanding what they're doing can help you do your job so much better as well. Just understanding what the players might be needed for, how maybe we can really help the club out by having a player do something very quickly can be really useful. So yeah, I think being the connector between the training ground and the stadium, or the training ground and the commercial side of the club, is a really important role of player care as well.
Also, because in this role, Hugo, there is this kind of really strong relationship side, let's say, of the role that is often you get valuable informations from informal talks, right? Like it's
Mhm.
not that it's not, it doesn't seem that kind of role that you need to make like formal meetings. Just
Yeah.
sometimes I imagine, like, just through informal conversations you get really valuable insights for your work, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what we're trying to do. Is if you sit a player down and say, we need to talk about your home life, they're going to go, oh, what's going on? What's the problem? But if you have a coffee, that, oh, how's things going at home? Oh, yeah, it's great, but my daughter's really struggling in school. Okay, well then that's fine. I can pick that. Oh, look, what can I help with that? Oh, that'd be great. So I think, yeah, you want to make it informal, especially, if there's a problem, then you maybe have to have a more formal meeting, but just to try and have conversations, but also understanding like every person that you meet has different communication style, has different personalities. And so some players might not want to chat. They're just very much, this is my job. I don't care about, it's not your business. Fine, no problem.
Yeah.
Other players, it's better with a coffee, or you go play a game of darts or pool or whatever, because that's how they open up and do it. So it's about really understanding who's your playing group, who's your staff group, and how do they best engage with you, and how can you solve their problems for them. I think it's really important.
And we were speaking about that connection with the recruitment team. Like when a player signs, the player care staff is the first to greet him, take him to the medical and the hotel, ensure paperwork is completed. Also, they oversee photos and videos, show him the training ground and stadium, and for instance, introduce him to the team and the manager. In the first weeks, you identify 7 key priorities that once those are sorted, as you say, like a player is a bit more self-sufficient. Could you just elaborate a bit on those, and what is their impact to the initial performance of each player?
Yeah, absolutely. So, often it depends club to club. Sometimes the sporting director or maybe the owner or the coach wants to be more involved, but often, not. They come in for a meeting and then they go. So we will be with the player, 18 hours a day, just trying to make sure that everything's organized. Once they sign, it's kind of easier, but at the initial period, it's very important. We then try and get sort of some key things sorted. So where they're going to live, how they're going to get around, so a car or a driver, communication, so it could be the phone, it could be the internet, bank account so they can get paid, very, very important, visas for the families and for the player as well. They can't play until that happens. English lessons for the kids, for the kids and for the player themselves. Even if they speak English to a good level, it's always important just do a little bit extra, just to talk about maybe accents or regional differences. And then kids in schools as well. So if they have kids, trying to register their kids in schools, and once, what we say is, once all of that is done, they have the building blocks to be able to live their life. They're much more self-sufficient. They can get around. They have a place to live. Then they're considered onboarded, and then they move to the ongoing phase, which is the second phase, which is as long as they're at the club. So in the onboarding phase, it's a lot of effort from the player care team, a lot of interaction. But once they've done that, then it turns to sort of a more hands-off approach, allowing them to live their life. And if they need the help, then we're here. But it's not 10 times a day. It's maybe one time a day we'd speak to them instead.
When you mentioned that, for instance, even for English speakers, that it's important to make that extra effort, like, you mean just for the ones with different kind of accents? Do you mean for everyone? And is it something that players receive well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if a player is English, we wouldn't do the English lessons. But even if they are a fluent non-native speaker, we'd encourage them to even say, "Look, let's do one lesson and just see where you're at." Some players really like it, some players don't. I think what's not really acceptable is when a player refuses to learn any language at all. And that's where having the sort of sporting director or the manager can help. Enforce that. Often it's not a problem, but sometimes players go, I just don't want to learn English, or I don't want to learn the club's language. That's fine, but it means it's going to be much harder for them to onboard. If you've ever been to a country where you don't speak the language, it's hard to even order a coffee or go to a shop or ask where you are, or even to really feel at home. And so, even we've had players who are Dutch, German, that those kind of areas tend to have very, very good English. Portuguese as well, so to have very good English speakers. But still, there are things. Often they learn American English rather than English. But if you're in, for example, Newcastle, it's a very different accent to then if you're in London. So it's just, again, trying to say, look, this is what people might say, this is what they mean, and then it might even be some sort of about cultural differences. So, for example, in England, we tend to be quite indirect as people. We don't like people going, I don't like this. You would go, I like a lot of things. This one I'm not so sure about. But if you go, I don't like this, people go, okay, what's wrong with him? But in Dutch culture or American culture, that's much more normal. So it's just trying to find, it's not saying you don't speak English. It's giving you opportunity to fit in better and to feel more at home. and not having the language restrict you.
Yeah. Do you feel that clubs evaluate these lots of times according to players' performance? And what I mean by this is like, okay, let's imagine a Senegalese player that arrives to the Premier League. If the guy's performance is in a great shape, is the club a bit more relaxed and chill when it comes to your previous work in the clubs? You know what I mean? Like if they are struggling, like sportingly speaking, maybe clubs can be a bit more pushy with you, like, okay, this guy needs to learn the languages, or is it never related, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it can be related, but my argument to that would be is it should be started before he even steps on the pitch. So it shouldn't be whether he's a good player or a bad player. That's not my judgment to make. We want to basically reduce the chances of that player failing, and so if he's not learning English, if you go, well, after 6 months he's not been playing well, we're going to teach him English. It's probably too late. Why wouldn't you learn it at the beginning? And so what we're trying to say is that we want to almost reduce the excuses possible for a player to say, or a manager to say as well, oh, this player doesn't work because he doesn't speak English. Well, let's teach him English. It's a useful skill for him to learn, not just in football, but in life more generally. The most spoken language in the world. So yes, sometimes we get, especially now as a consultant, when I go into a club, they might go, we've really struggled with this player. Can you help? Can you look at what we're doing? And I might go, okay, these things have been missed. Let's try this. But if I'm in a club full time, and we wouldn't go, well, he's a really good player, we're not going to bother with it. If anything, it's more important. But working at Brentford, for example, they're a club that signs players from across the world. We signed a South Korean player, but young players from across the world. So Uzbekistan player, a South Korean player, a Nigerian player, and a Ukrainian player, all within about space of about 6 months. Now they're not playing right away in this first team, but we need to make sure that they have the ability to live and be happy, because it's hard enough moving to another country at 18 years old anyway. Let's do it and give them the chances to succeed. And then hopefully they move into the first team, but they have everything they need. So, yeah, I don't think it should be about performance, but sometimes you'll hear a manager say, well, yeah, he's no good because he's not fit in. Okay, well, my argument would be, well, okay, what did we do to if I think we prepared him well, I maybe listen to it, try and understand, but maybe it's because he's played in the wrong position or whatever. But you would never say that to a manager. But if you have a good relationship with the manager, you can have that conversation.
Yeah, and after all, like when people tells you, okay, but these guys are grown-ups a lot of times, so they should know how to do things. After all, like you say, if a player misses a game because his car was sized up for unpaid taxes, no one will
Yeah.
see it as a life lesson. So they
Yeah.
will just wonder, okay, what the hell is happening? Why
Yeah.
we didn't sort this out? Like, so it's really important. Is a profession in which.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they are absolute adults, and they can always have their own decisions to do whatever they want. But they're also assets of the club, and they're also people who need to perform and need to have the tools to do their job. And we're always happy to teach players if they want to learn about how to do things. But if players don't want to learn, then that's their adult right to not do that. But we can't have issues off the pitch affecting them on the pitch and undermining what they're needed to do.
If a manager from a multinational company needs his passport to be valid to work, probably the human resources of that company could take care of it, right? Because you don't want to have an asset paying a guy to not work, right? So it's a bit kind of the
Yeah,
same.
and I think it's the only person that really loses is the club, is the employer. So yeah, okay, should players renew their own passports? Sure, but if they don't, and you've got a Champions League game, and that player's not available, then that's the club that loses. So why wouldn't we have processes in place to make sure? It's just like the boots. Can the player take their own boots? Yeah, of course they can. But if they forget it, the club is the one that loses out. So we have somebody who takes the boots for them.
Yeah.
Is it necessary? Probably not. But is it important that we have minimizing distractions, minimizing issues? Yeah, absolutely, because it's a competition, and we want to be better than the other team, so we need to be better prepared.
Yeah, for sure. And you see yourself as someone who pushes boundaries whenever things start feeling too comfortable. That's why you left the UK for the US, your birthplace, specifically Indianapolis, to join Indy 11 in their first season and start fresh. It's the same drive that led you to leave Southampton for West Ham and later start your own business, the Player Care Group, when you felt settled at West Ham. Specifically at Indy 11, you began as team operations coordinator and were later promoted to team operations manager. Could you share more about that exciting opportunity and how it taught you to build the infrastructure for a brand new team?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Indianapolis straight out of university, and you could say it was because I wanted to push myself. It was also because they were the only people that offered me a job out of university. Not that I wasn't happy to be there, I was, but it was a kind of forced move as well. But yeah, in school I wanted to live abroad. I went to America, and then I've come back, since. But I look. I think it's very easy in football to be there forever and be, especially when you find a club you're happy with, like I have multiple clubs, you could be there forever and you're good at your job. It's easy. You kind of like you go through the motions. But for me, that's boring. It's boring to be kind of going at 60%, 70% and doing the same thing every day. I want to be learning. I want to be challenging myself. And that's why I love doing consultancy work now, is because I go into clubs for a short period of time, different cultures, different languages, different experiences. I give them my knowledge for sure, but I also learn a lot as well. And so, we recently helped a club in Mexico start their player care department, and conversations about Mexico. I don't know Mexico. I don't understand the culture. I don't know how they live there, but also they didn't have an experience of player care. So we met in the middle, and we both learned from each other. And it was a really valuable experience for me, despite the fact the level of football is sort of the lower than I've worked at before. So I'm always curious. I'm always interested to learn from other countries, but other sports as well. And I think that's the best way to be as an entrepreneur and also as a professional in any company.
Was it Toluca, the Mexican club?
It was, yeah, yeah.
And that kind of experience, I imagine, it the first foreign club resorting to the services of the player care group.
No, no, it wasn't. But it was the first club in Liga MX to use us, so it was nice. It was a sort of different project than before. It was really support. They decided we had some meetings with them before. They decided they wanted to hire someone and they wanted me to mentor him. So there I did. But yeah, we work with clubs across the world. We've had a number of MLS clubs do our trainings. We've worked with clubs like Borussia Dortmund, AC Milan. Always looking for new clubs to work with and support with the variety of products we have, and to learn from them and to teach them as well.
And returning to Indy 11, was it when you not only learned to work with a very tight budget, as you put it, but also to identify the leaders and the outsiders in the team's changing room? So maybe this kind of team management it's also interesting to speak about. Like, could you elaborate a bit on this one?
Yeah, I mean, the Indy 11 experience was crazy, really, because I was the 12th member of staff or 13th member of staff the club hired. It was a new team, and that really only happens in America, I think, or in the newer countries. So the club formed out of nowhere. I was 12th or 13th employee. I signed. We had the head coach, and we had one player, and that was it. And so we had to build a roster, build a squad, build a training ground, I had to order the kit for the first time. We had all this stuff we had to do, which normally, is just done or it's been done before. And so that was a really good experience. I was straight out of university. But we had to build a squad. And normally in a transfer window, you might have 4 or 5 players leave, 4 or 5 players come in. We had 25 players come in, and no one knew each other. No one had been there before. We had American players. We had a lot of Honduran players. We had a player who won the World Cup in a player called Kleberson, mixing with guys who were basically, just playing in college, locally in Indiana. So a really interesting mix, and trying to get them all into the city was one problem, but actually trying to understand that, like, how do you mix these players together? We had 5 or 6 different nationalities in the room, different experience levels, different, like, quality of players. All trying to figure out with a head coach who hadn't coached before, or hadn't been a head coach before, with a very young staff. And so it was a very interesting experience. And so, yeah, you try and work out who are the leaders in the changing room, who are the players who are going to be your allies. We're lucky we had a couple of captains who were excellent. And we also had some players who were really difficult, but difficult probably because they were away from home for the first time. They were living in a new country, or they were away from family, and you know, professional athlete, yeah, but a professional athlete at quite a low level. So you're not earning really big money that you can go and live a great lifestyle, but you're also, it's not a full time job in the terms of, yeah, you work 3-4 hours a day and then you're free the rest of the day. So was a really interesting learning experience. It's not one that I'd want to repeat necessarily. It was very hard work. I think I worked 53 days in a row at one point without a day off. But straight out of university, is the best experience you could ever have.
And like, because there were some let's say critical situations, right? There is one story that you needed to wake up at 5 a.m. to go on to the just grab some breakfast to avoid the cost
Yeah.
of the hotel, right? So this kind of stuff that are usually linked to the beginning of a career of someone.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So we didn't have any money, and so yeah, I would go when we were on preseason tour. I'd have to go to the local Target or Walmart or whatever it was, and buy fruit and juice and yogurts and stuff like that. But then we didn't even want to pay for a fridge. So then, it was like crazy. And so, I was up at 5 in the morning. I'd be at bed at midnight. But, the other alternative is my dad was a farmer. I could have been a farmer, and you get up there and instead of working with footballers, you're working with cows. So I'm very happy that I did the work that I did. As I said, don't want to replicate it. Like, it's much more enjoyable working at a Premier League budget where you don't not only have your own food, but you have 3 chefs that travel with you, and it's much more enjoyable. But also the level's higher and the pressure's higher as well. So different type of pressure, but as a young 23-year-old, it was an amazing experience for sure.
And I'm sure this experience followed you throughout your career, right? Like this kind of leaders and the outsiders on the changing room identification. So, as you put it, like if you don't have the right personality to stand up and fight your own corner, you will be in a tough spot. But at the same time, you can't be cocky because otherwise players can just think, okay, let's gonna take him down. So yeah, do you have like any kind of insights you would give to Hugo in the beginning of his career to handle this kind of management?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You've got to be confident enough to hold your own because, when I went to Southampton, I was 24 years old. Our oldest player was 38. So, I'm 14 years younger than the oldest player. It's a very strange position to be in, but also having to try and tell him maybe how he should behave or tell him the things to do things he doesn't want to do. Um, I mean, I think going back to my younger self, I think I would probably say, I'd probably say, you know what, don't take it so seriously, like, which seems like a strange advice, but I burnt myself out by working every single hour because you can never finish the job of player care. There's always something that you can do more. And I would work, I didn't take any holiday or much holiday at all. I would always be on call. I'd always be getting up early in the morning and like, yeah, okay, now you can say you don't have to do it. But I think being willing to say no more, or no, but here's a better solution. So no, I won't help you at 4 in the morning, but I'll deal with it at 8 o'clock when I come in. That would have been a better way to deal with things than kind of going crazy and trying to deal with things as they come up. So yeah, I think the more established I've got in my career, I'm able to deal with emergencies when they need to be dealt with, but understand what is an emergency and what isn't an emergency and how do you deal with it. So I think, yeah, being willing to say no or being able to just stand up to players a little bit more. I think when I was younger, it was very naive sometimes, but that comes with age and it comes with experience as well.
And in this imaginary conversation with your young self, would you have like any kind of advice also for Hugo to earn players' trust? Because we know that players are often like, let's say, they get lots of requests for jerseys, match tickets, and this kind of stuff. So, of course, I imagine this is you can gain this trust with work, of course, and the good quality one. But would you have like any advice on this matter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you don't want players to see you as a fan. I think that's really important. You want to see them as an equal professional. Sometimes you have to tell them what to do, and sometimes they tell you what to do, and you live on respect. I think, yeah, I mean, if you're asking for tickets and shirts and stuff early on, then you're going to be in a real problem, and that's certainly not advisable. But I think that I've never felt like I've had issues gaining trust because I will tell them the truth, and like even if they don't want to hear it or they don't like to hear the answers. So, if I read a letter and I go, "Oh, this player owes £10,000 because he didn't pay a bill," I will tell the player that, and I'll say, "Look, you need to pay this." I won't say, "Oh, don't worry about it; it'll go away." Like that's not the right way to operate. And I think if people know that whatever you're going to say is probably the truth or what you believe is the truth, it's very important. And I think to say, to be honest when you don't know the answer, I think is really important because players understand they're meet enough people and I don't know if I could swear, so they hear enough rubbish day to day. But they know when people are lying and when people are not lying. And so I would much rather say, I actually don't know the answer to that. Let me have a look and I'll come back to you rather than going, oh, yeah, it's definitely this. And they go, no, it's not, or I don't believe you or whatever. So that would be my two bits of advice. I did feel like I learned that pretty early and I think I did a good job of it. But yeah, certainly that's probably the advice I would give to someone coming through.
And then the second experience in your career, after Indy 11, you then joined Southampton at age 23, when they were only, if I'm not mistaken, let me know if I am, the 13th Premier League club to hire someone for the role. And at that club, familiar with you from your internship with the under 18 team 2 years earlier, you were by yourself in the department reacting to whatever came up. You'd connect with players at breakfast to get a sense of what was ahead, and the fact that many players weren't expecting this role at all helped you shape it your way. While constantly fighting fires in a more administrative role, with little time for planning or strategizing wasn't ideal, of course. It was a really valuable experience for you also because of that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a brilliant experience. I mean, to be effectively a head of player care at 23, 24 years old of a Premier League club was fantastic. And I learned a huge amount at Southampton and have a huge amount of regard with that club. But also that time at Southampton, we were, a top team. We were 3 points off the Champions League. We competed in Europe 2 seasons. We get to a cup final in 2017. And so, you're working with some of the best players in the world, and I think three or four of those players were nominated for the Ballon d'Or. I think two of them came in the top three a couple of times. So, these are seriously top players, but early in their careers with a top manager in Ronald Koeman as well. Obviously other managers afterwards, but it was it's funny. Like you think when you're there, you just think of it as your reality, but when you look back, you see it as really some of the best times. And yeah, I learned a huge amount. Hopefully, improved the support for the players a huge amount as well. But yeah, it was the quickest I'd ever learned for sure. It was a really great time.
I imagine that also your like the role of a player care manager in a club, maybe the way it flows can be also really linked to performance, right? Because I don't know, but like an administrative task or financial or something, maybe it's more kind of disconnected from the sporting results, but I imagine that you have some requests to do to players, or like some things you need to speak about. And if the team is like in a really bad shape, sportingly speaking, it can be a bit tougher to get them to do whatever you need them to do. No.
Yes or no? It really depends on the situation. I think sometimes it can be easier because it can be like, you don't have almost like the right to say no because you're not performing on the pitch. So I need you to perform off the pitch. But it would never be the conversation like that. For me, I try and take the results out of it a little bit and say, I can't control what happens on the pitch. I can support you off the pitch. And I think it also comes back to treating all the players equally as much as possible. So just because you have a number three goalkeeper who, you're like, oh, he never plays, it doesn't matter, I don't have to look after him. Football changes so quickly, and I've seen that number three goalkeeper go and play 5 games and keep clean sheets. And then if you treated him badly at the beginning, then he would be like, well, why are you asking me to do things now? So I think it's really important you have a respect for all players. yes, I understand the game and I watch the game and I understand the results, but for me, I think it was important that I didn't really want to speak to them about football often. Um, and allowing them to see me as the non-football person in the club was good. But when you're losing game and after game after game, and it's happened a couple of times in my career where the club's lost 5-6 games in a row, everyone gets quite down and quite quite miserable. But depending on the manager is how you fix it. So some managers will be like, right, let's do some more player care, let's do an event, or let's do a party, or let's do a team bonding day, and that's really exciting. And some managers will be like, no, just focus on the football, just work more. Fine as well. It's up to the manager to set the tone. But yeah, results change, and sometimes that if a player's been sent off and missed a penalty, they're probably asking them to do a play appearance the next day is not going to be the right thing to do. But also sometimes you have to suck it up, and it's what needs to be done. And so you use your positive relationship with that player to get that done as well.
And at Southampton, apart from showing players around property, sorting out the paperwork, you needed also to look after coaches and players. So, like everything also that was related to managing match trips, ensuring flights were on time, hotels had enough rooms, this kind of stuff were under your umbrella. So it was more a reactive role, as is commonly expected of a player liaison, whereas now you're pushing, as we already spoke about, for a more strategic and proactive approach. So basically, your daily work is more linked with also research what the team needs and creating a process to care for them. You're confident that this proactive player care department that clubs can have truly have a real benefit, right? So this is kind of a generic question, but I think is important also just to show, maybe with a couple of examples, to show to people the real value and the real impact in clubs.
Yeah, I mean, look, in all of my three major Premier League roles, I've been overseeing the player care and the team operations. So that's not normal, and that's not actually what we advise clubs to do. It's too much of a job for one person to do both. But as I've got older and more experienced, then I tend to have more people working for me in a club. So the junior staff will deal with the easier problems, the day-to-day problems, leaving me to think about the strategy and planning and dealing with serious issues. But yeah, I mean, the more you can proactively solve problems, the less time staff have to deal with those problems. So if you have, I don't know, 100 flat tires every year, and every time you go, well, how do we fix this? That's going to take you a lot longer than, oh, we have a guy, we text him, we know what we need, we give him the size and this and this and this, and he can do it, and the billing is set up. It'll help you so much easier. And that's a very low level example, but it's trying to make sure that you don't have to keep doing the same work again and again and again. How do we prevent those problems from happening, or deal with them much quicker when they come up? And that's kind of what a head of player care should be doing a lot of the time.
And could you, Hugo, also elaborate a bit on the three levels that can exist in a player care department? Because like you have that kind of reasoning, like level one, just to send the player an onboarding package. Level two, pick the guy from the airport, show him around. So could you
Okay.
just a bit speak a bit
Yeah.
about these three levels?
Yeah, so we've actually got 5 levels now. So it's we're always growing and adding the levels. So yeah, when we're trying to audit a club, we came up with 170 different sort of rules, I would say they're called, to say what is good player care and what is bad player care. And each of these 170 different areas, we grade the club from level 0, which is the worst, which is basically doing nothing, to level 5 being sort of a fully proactive, like top Champions League level club ability. So, with everything, there's a different way of doing it. And so, in the example you talked about, when you're first meeting the player and picking them up from the airport, level 0 is nothing. You're like, okay, they should find the address online and get there themselves. Level, which is not realistic really in any club, but level 1 would be send them the address and here's a number for a taxi. Okay, again, not going to happen in the Premier League, but might happen in the 4th or 5th division in England or whatever. But level 5 would be, making sure there's a custom welcome pack for the players, making sure there's multiple cars if the kids need to go to a different venue, or the agent or the families, having a little bit of food, a local charger, for the phone, having, you know, translators available if needed, all these other things. It's like, how do we make it as personal and as welcoming as possible? And that's a very easy example because it's just about thinking about it and spending a little bit more money. But actually, in some of the other areas, it's quite hard to work out what to do better. And it's how do we really improve those things, and let clubs decide where they want to be in terms of level. Because some clubs say we don't need that much support. That's fine, but this is how you get to that point, and this is how you get to that level.
And contrary to your time at Southampton, when you arrived at West Ham, you were already the head of department, so you had more influence and decision making power. You believe that West Ham had one of the best player care departments in the world, thanks to a motivated team of three with complementary skills and backgrounds. You focus on team related activities, working with the coaching staff, on team bonding, travel, and scheduling, while your assistants handled day to day tasks with players. So you had also more resources and the proper time to plan for long term projects. Would you say the structure you built at West Ham, along with support from club key figures such as David Moyes, showed you the real value of a proactive and focused player care department can bring? Like with having this kind of key coach, like a well-known figure that really believed in your work, this can make a huge difference, right?
Yeah, I think West Ham was a kind of a funny club because sometimes they do really things very well and sometimes they do things less well. But one of the things they said to me was that I was coming in as the player care expert, and so I could build the team that I wanted. And I was very lucky to hire two excellent staff who were, as you said, complementary skills, but really believed in what we were doing, and I trusted each other, 100%, and that was really good. Um, and I think with the managers, I mean, all the managers I've worked with, I've worked well with. It's for me, it's about showing how we can make their job easier. And so, David Moyes didn't believe in me just because he was a nice person. He believed in me because I showed him how we could solve problems for him and make his job easier. And so, yes, it's always good to have the managers buy-in, but I think often it's the role of the junior staff member to show that senior member why should they support you, why should they care. It's not like a natural thing that's going to happen, especially with a manager who's so busy. So yeah, I had a great relationship with David, but I also had a good relationship with Manuel Pellegrini, and I had David Moyes twice, so it was maybe easier. But like I did that through understanding what he prioritized, what's his problems, how do I fix those for him and make his life easier, and that's what I did. So yeah, it was really important.
And on that, Hugo, you say that with all the coaching staff members that you worked with that didn't believe in your work in the beginning, you always managed to get them to have their buy-in, even if they weren't the best advocates for the role, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the least I would want is them not to care about it. But hopefully they do care about it. And, not just the manager, but the assistant managers and the coaches as well. Often they are so focused what happens on the pitch, but showing that actually, it's not just, booking reservations at hotels and all of this. It's trying to really reduce issues off the pitch. And, every club I've been at, I've been lucky enough to have good relationships with the coaching staff. Some that maybe at the beginning were very skeptical or very unsure. I showed them the value in what good player care can do, but it's not just me; it's the staff and any club that can happen. But if you make it relevant to them, they're more likely to make it interesting for them.
Of course, it's better than nothing to have one person, but you always emphasize that it would be important to have at least two persons, right? Because if one person gets sick or leaves the club, then you would get like to start from scratch, kind of, right?
Yeah, and I mean it's not only if they leave, but even day to day. Like we spoke earlier about the triangle of player care. You can't be all of those different areas for everybody, but also like the way that life works, we all like different people. We all have friends with different people, and so having a diverse group of people can be important. But it's the football never stops, especially football never stops. But even more, the personal life doesn't stop because when the team is off, they are thinking about the things in their personal life. And so if you're working when the team is working and you're working when the team is not working, it's impossible to work 365 days a year. So I always say to clubs, the best for probably for a top team is 3 people. But even 2 people is great because it gives somebody the time to have time off, but also have different skills in the department. But yeah, look, I was by myself for 3.5 years at Southampton, I guess, and Indianapolis for another year. I don't want to do that again. It was really really hard work, and you can never stop. You can never switch off, and it becomes hard to do it for a long period of time for sure.
Is that number 3 people exactly directly linked with the 3 pieces of the triangle?
No, it's not. It's how you can effectively cover a team of say 25 players by giving one person a day off and having 2 people covering in case of an emergency. Yes, the triangle is important, but actually, like personal developmental is probably less important in the first team. So really, between as long as you have operational welfare covered a little bit, so covered completely, you can cover personal developmental between the two of you. But it's about having people who have different skills, but also can work different hours as well. And you don't need people in the office at night, but to have your phone on every single day and every single night. You need to have people have time off. People have lives. They have families.
Yeah.
It's important to have at least 3, I think. But yeah, 2 if you can, 2 if you can't. But 3 is a good place to sit, really, I think.
In your mind, would there be any maximum amount? Is there any number that you think, okay, starting from this kind of amount, I see
Yeah.
it being a bit more counterproductive, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've seen it at clubs where they have, more than 10 people. And for me, it becomes too impersonal. The players don't know who everyone is. It's confusing in the club who does what job and how that works. But it's about how you manage it. So if you manage it really well, then maybe. But I think, it depends on the squad. If you have a top elite team with a lot of players, a lot of coaches, and everyone's from different countries, then maybe you need more than 3. But I think with 3 or maybe 4, you can do nearly anything you need to do, really.
At West Ham, again, you were keen not to hire people from other clubs because you weren't focused on how others did things. You wanted to follow your own approach, which you consider different, and didn't want outside influences to affect the processes you aim to establish. Over your career, did you come to realize that sharing experiences between clubs isn't always as valuable, given that each club has its own unique reality? And the reason I'm asking this is because at Southampton, you know that one of your early initiatives was setting up a WhatsApp group to connect
Mm.
player liaisons from different British clubs and organizing regular dinners to exchange experiences. So I was wondering if throughout your career you just realize that, okay, sharing experiences is nice, but actually it doesn't tell you maybe as much as you thought in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 kind of different things there. We were always happy to share what we were doing, but I didn't necessarily want to hire someone from another club because I thought that whenever I interviewed people from other clubs, they always said they always were not open minded in the way they wanted to work, and they didn't want to learn necessarily. They wanted to do, and so when I hired my 2 staff at West Ham, neither of them had ever worked in football before. One of them didn't even like football at all, and I thought it was nice. Because it allowed her to have a more person focused approach. But what I'm always happy to share, this is my business now, is to share information and to help clubs look at each other and learn. And so while I was happy to share and happy to look at other people, I also wanted staff who were fully bought in because I said it's my job as the head of department to look at what other clubs are doing and see what we like and what we don't like. And then to give that into one clear way of doing it for a department. But yeah, we still had the WhatsApp group. I mean, still have the WhatsApp group now, to be honest. So it's not something that I don't do, but I was always wanting to hire sort of rough staff, like as in they don't have all the skills, they're not finished article, because I thought it was easier to find high potential people rather than trying to hire people from other clubs.
And maybe just in this final, just to ask you, like in on West Ham, when we think about this kind of really good department with a great synergy between the 3 of you, Could you also elaborate a bit on this? Because you had this woman joining you from women's rugby that was really had this kind of HR background. Then the other guy was an uni graduate that spoke some languages that you both didn't. If you could just give a bit of context on that.
Yeah, I mean, I said to them early on, like, they'd not worked in football, and I said, like, that's why I'm here. I've worked in other clubs, and I'm here to be the expert. And I said, I want you guys to learn. I want you to make mistakes. Just be honest with me if you make a mistake or you're not sure. I will protect you from whatever happens, and I will take the blame if something goes wrong. Um, and we had a great team. We were three very different people at different stages of our lives, different stages of our careers, but whether we got lucky, whether it was planned, I don't know. But either way, it worked. But we had players who liked the young guy more than the other two, or they liked the girl more than me. And that's how life is. You have different people you relate to, and we had different skill sets. We had different interests as well. For example, I don't really care about cars. Neither did my other member of staff. So the young guy loves cars, so he did all the car stuff because he likes cars, and that helps. So it was a very, like, I guess, a fortunate mix, but also it was something that I've tried to have a good team, and we had a really, really good team, and one I'm still very proud of. But yeah, sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes you get less lucky.
And thinking about this comparison between Southampton and West Ham, you admit that West Ham you weren't so naive, as you put it, like as you were
Sure.
at Southampton. So you really wanted to separate your professional life from your personal one. So as you say, like I think you never had dinner with anyone at the club. So do you think this kind of separation is really necessary? Do you think is more linked with your own personality? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I joined Southampton, I was 23 years old, 24 years old, living in a city I didn't know anyone. I was, in the same position as the players, same age as the players. All of us kind of lonely, all of us kind of bored, and so being friends with them worked for both of us. But then there started to be problems where if there was a disagreement between the club and the player, I would not be able. I'd find it very hard to be impartial, or I'd be expected to make a decision that maybe would hurt my friend or my friendship. And so when I went to West Ham, I was lucky because in London I have a lot of friends and a lot of connections already. So I said I'm going to separate it myself. I'm going to be just work, at work, and I'm going to be friends with people outside. And it definitely helped me. And I still try and do that now. When I went to Brentford, I became friends with a number of people once I left. But when I was there, I didn't hang out with people outside of work because I was there to do a job. And you can get on with someone really well at work without being their friend. And I think that's important to have that delineation, because we deal with in player care, you're dealing with people's personal lives, and you've got to remember you're not a part of the family, you're not a friend. You can be afterwards, but at the time you're not. And so I think it's really important to have that delineation. And I would, as hard as it can be, especially if you don't know anyone, where you are, it's really important to have that delineation if you can.
You even had some issues, let's call it like that, after leaving a club, like right, like a guy tell you, okay, my tenancy agreement is coming to an end. Can you just come to the city and help me
Yeah.
out with this? So
Yeah.
I imagine this was also a bit tough for you in that moment, right? Just to explain to players, look, okay, we are mates, we are friends, but this is not my job, and it's not a
Yeah.
matter of money.
And that's the thing is, I think there was maybe a difference where, yes, the players knew I was getting paid and they knew it was my job, but because I would go for dinner with them and I would hang out with them, then it would be like, well, we're friends as well. And I think the mistake that I made there was letting that happen. And for me, the thought I had was, if they're friends with me, they'll tell me more things and I can help them better. But what happened was when I left, a lot of people felt, the players maybe felt not betrayed necessarily, but quite surprised that I would go to a different club, especially one at the time that was kind of similar place in the league and all of that. But I just, I was had to say, look, I get paid to do this. I'm getting paid to do it by West Ham now. Like, I have to be loyal to West Ham players. But I think some people were like, well, what the hell kind of thing. And so certainly at West Ham, when I left West Ham, everyone understood that that was my job and my job was now finished. But again, I think probably comes down to being young and naive, and also probably struggling myself personally, that I wanted that friendship and that validation, which as I got older, I don't need as much.
And Hugo, you've worked with more than 150 players throughout your career, and as you say, like a 19-year-old coming from the academy will be, of course, different from a senior pro with 100 international caps, even nationality-wise. So, of course, you can find some similarities, but each player is different. Even though, like, did you find any patterns? I mean, when you meet for the first time any player, do you have like any kind of group in terms of, like, again, nationality wise, or in terms of the age group of players? Is this helpful in some way in your work, or you just advise people to look, you should just have your mind like without any kind of previous idea, and you just meet each player as it's with their own needs, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of maybe subconsciously have some ideas, but I've had a 22-year-old player who wanted to live in the middle of nowhere, whereas you'd usually expect a young player to want to live in a city center apartment where everything is life. And he grew up on a farm and he wanted to live on a farm. And I was like, well, in London there aren't many farms, so but my assumption would be we'd show him all the apartments in central London, but it's not what he wanted. So yeah, but you try and work out this player. Like, football's a small world. So like I've worked with, as you said, over 150 players. The chances are they know some of those players, whether through the national team or through other clubs or academies or whatever. So you have to try and speak to them, and then you see what, if you mention a player's name, do they go, "Oh yeah, great guy," or "Yeah, I'm not sure." Then again, it can hand say, "Okay, maybe they didn't get on because they're different people." So you're always trying to work out as quickly as possible, what type of player is this? Sorry, what type of person is this? What do they like? Do they want someone to be more friendly? Do they want to be someone to be more direct? Are they really focused on themselves? Are they focused on their family? Is it because of the money? Is it because of what do they care about? And then once you find out what they care about, then you can work out how you need to maybe change your own personality a little bit to adapt and make them feel more comfortable, or make them feel, get the best out of their relationship.
And as you say, Hugo, like if you were to move to Senegal, age 19, you probably wouldn't know how to get a phone, at least
Yeah.
immediately, and this kind of stuff. So, and apart from this, like more than this, you also approach each request from players as a unique request. And for you, there are no ridiculous requests.
Mhm.
So, because if it's important for the player, it should be also important for the club, and consequently for you. So you have a really good story to explain a bit this for the request of the from the player that forgot his wife's birthday. Maybe I know you already told this thousands of times, but I think is a good one to show a bit your perspective.
Yeah, I think the most common question I get asked by either fans or people I meet who find out what I do is, "What's the stupidest request you've ever had?" And I think, as you said, it's really important that if it's important to them, it's important to us. And sometimes you can push back on it, but understanding what's the problem. So the story you mentioned was a player who forgot his wife's birthday, and she was traveling in East Asia, and he wanted to. He was really worried about the solution, and so I said, "Okay, let me have a think." And I came up with three solutions. The first one was that he called and apologized. The second one was that he like FedExed it or posted it very quickly. It might miss it, but it would cost him maybe £500. And the third would be that we get someone on a plane, we fly them overnight, to the wife's hotel with the handbag that she wanted, blah blah blah, and this would cost, I don't know, £20,000. Um, and in reality, like you might say, well, that's crazy to spend £20,000 on that. But if those people who are in relationships, if you forgot your partner's birthday and you could spend 2 hours salary or 3 hours salary in order to fix that, or even 2 days salary, you probably would do it. So it's not a ridiculous request. Now the player ended up just apologizing and saying, I've got a nice present for you when I'm home. Fine, no problem. Didn't spend any money. but we wanted to make sure the player wasn't focusing on this the day before the game, had a clear solution that was safe and appropriate, and felt heard by the club and supported. And I think we did all of those three things. And yeah, it's crazy to think that you'd pay someone to fly to Asia and back, but maybe in their life it's not crazy, and it would help solve a lot of problems.
And I think one of the main lessons of from this story is what you already said before during our talk. Like you should always provide players with alternatives, right? So as you say, like you shouldn't say no. You should always say no, but and then
Yeah.
present alternatives, right? This is really important in this kind of role.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that story is a great example of that because had we not found a solution, they may have found someone else who is a bad person or has bad intentions to go and do it, or maybe we just charge them too much money. So, yeah, I always try and say no, not say no, but say no, but how about this? Unless it's something obviously illegal or something great, way out of it. But often the time it's like, no, you can't. We can't maybe do that. But how about this as a solution? And 99% of the time they're very happy. But if you just go, no, can't help you, someone else will help them and probably not have their best interests at heart.
And coming back to the relationship side of the role, I know that you were also good at this kind of human side. For instance, if you knew that the finance guy, like it was his son's birthday, and his sons loved, for instance, Alan, for instance, Crosswell, you would probably get him a signed shirt. And then of course, if in 1 month time you would need something from the finance guy, you would get some, probably he would be more keen to on helping you. So these kind of human skills are really important, not just in the relationship with players and the coaching staff, but even in terms of the several departments from each club, right, from the club.
Yeah, so I think we spoke about earlier about being that link between the club and the training ground, and I think it's important. Yeah, it could be as obvious as that, but it could just be that someone likes talking about their grandkids, and I write it in my phone and I remember to ask about their grandkids every time I speak to them, and that's really important. So it's about trying to understand what makes people tick, what makes people interested, because if you're good to people, I believe that people will be good to you back. And if you're difficult with people, if you have the power, then sure, they'll have to help you. But once you don't have the power anymore, then they can trip you up very quickly and maybe turn against you. So I've always tried to deal with the approach of let's help as many people as possible. And yeah, it seems to have worked okay so far.
And do you think that to maximize a player care department, you would also need to be involved in team bonding? Because I know that, for instance, with David Moyes, you were really keen on presenting like this kind of initiatives, such as quiz nights and karaoke sessions, which, of course, if it helps team bonding, it could be really helpful for a sporting performance, I would say. Do you think that if you think about an optimal workflow for a player care department, is this something that you are always really into this?
Yeah, it depends on the manager. I think the more you can be involved with the manager, the better. You want to have they're ultimately a key decision maker, and this often fits quite well into player care departments. But some managers are just not interested in it, or it's not their style, and that's fine as well. With David, he really believed in that, and we had a good time organizing the different events and having a good time. So yeah, it was really important to him, and so it was important to me. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to say don't get involved in it, because if everyone is building a relationship and you're sat on the outside, then that makes it very hard for you.
Especially with David Moyes, like everyone, for instance, birthday came up, you always told him like, okay, this guy is his birthday and so on. This was something that David Moyes really appreciated, right?
Yeah, David is a great person. He's a great person. He's a great man manager, and he likes to have the information so that he can be the best boss and the best manager possible. And so we'd always try and help him and make him look good, and he would make us look good in return. So yeah, specifically he was great, but I've also worked with other managers who've been good, and if they're interested in it, as we said earlier, like then I'm happy to help them. And if they're not, then the least I want them to be is not care about it. But I've never had a manager who hates what I do, so Maybe if I experienced that, then that would be a
Yeah.
different story. But yeah.
And also, Hugo, before speaking about agents, the relationships with agents, and just taking back to the player recruitment, I guess player care departments are really good and directly speaking in when it comes to good publicity, right? Because like if a club is a mess and doesn't know how to treat players and how to manage their daily life, probably they would get kind of bad publicity between football players, right? So I guess that this is kind of indirect and maybe you can't probably you can't measure it, but I guess it also works as a recruitment tool like this, no?
Yeah, I mean, look, players speak to each other all the time, and we want to make sure that even if a player doesn't enjoy their time at the club on the pitch, they enjoy their time off the pitch because, yeah, so many times, like if anyone is ever going to one of my former clubs that I know, they'll call me and say, "What is the club like?" And sometimes say it's good, sometimes say it's bad, and so it's important for me that any player who leaves any of my clubs feel like they had a good support off the pitch, and that they'll tell the other player that as well. So yeah, the players know which clubs are better run, which ones are worse run, which one have a better time. Even which city is better for the families. They talk to each other, and so it's really important that you give a good impression because maybe a good impression doesn't change as much, but a bad if someone says it's bad, it might actually mean they don't even want to go to the club, depending on how bad it is.
I was mentioning agents because, of course, that player care professionals don't just interact with a club staff. So while you admit your conversations with agents are limited, you also believe that agents and player care staff often work more in parallel than together, which is not ideal. Agents focus on contracts and football related matters, while player care staff have local knowledge and connections. So for you, the best dynamic is a healthy relationship where they catch up when needed, but stay focused on their own areas of expertise. Unfortunately, you've seen many cases where foreign agents lacking local knowledge try to handle players themselves, right? And in these kind of situations, things often get messy with players ultimately losing out. And of course, you guys like player care staff, we should in the end are there to clean the mess. But yeah, there is a huge a long path to improve in this, no?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've had good agents and bad agents, and I've worked with both in my career. As I said, I think, as you said, I think working sometimes in parallel is easier because they have their expertise, I have my expertise. But yeah, ideally, you want to work with them, but a lot of agents aren't necessarily aligned with that or don't have the expertise, but want to show the value that they can bring, and often I tend to make it worse or get confused or there's mixed messaging. So um, it depends. I will meet the agent and see how I think they might be, or if I've worked with them before, then fine. But often I say to the agent, you deal with the commercial things, you deal with the contract, I'll deal with everything personal, and if we have problems, we speak. But having an agent trying to find a car when they're not from England or not from, it makes it more complicated. They find the wrong deal and they don't understand how the contracts work or stuff like that. So it's easier just if we do it. But if an agent really wants to be involved, then fine, not a problem.
But in the end, even if an agent really wants a player to overperform and to do great for the club, as you say, like why would clubs rely on someone who doesn't work for the club? So that has not like the club's interests in mind, at least as a priority, right?
Yeah, and so that's why clubs are hiring player care staff, is because previously this was something that agents would do, but the agent doesn't work for the club and doesn't pay the bills for the club. So yeah, it's more important now that they that the clubs have it in their own hands. So yeah, I think it's important.
And you also think that budget constraints from clubs, like and even financial fair play from UEFA, you think that this can also be a good thing for player care, right? You think that as much more constraints there is, it can help a player care department to start working. No.
Yeah, I think the less time, when clubs have unlimited money, then they can, why bother looking after the players? Just replace them if they don't work. But actually, we're seeing more and more players having to stay at clubs because no one will buy them or no one can afford to have them, and so it makes more sense that we try and spend the money wisely. And so yeah, whether a club has less money or they have financial fair play restrictions or PSR restrictions, then it's really important that they have a good player care team that tries to make sure that every one of the players they do spend money on succeeds as quickly as possible.
Do you think, Hugo, that clubs can get a bit complacent with the fact that, Premier League clubs have so much money that if a player doesn't fit the style of play of the team, or if he doesn't perform, they just change it? And this can, on the other hand, have a negative impact in what regards to invest in player care even more?
Yeah, but clubs are allowed to do that. If they want to make that decision, then they can do it. But what we're trying to say to clubs is there's a cleverer way to do it. It's a cheaper way to do it if they can get it right. But always there will be decisions made too quickly or made for the wrong reasons, and that's part of sport and part of life in general. But we're saying to clubs who want to look into it, look, there's a different way to do it, and we can help you try and minimize the chances of these players failing. We can't prevent it 100%. I would never say that we could, but try and minimize those risks, and then go from there. Really.
You say that if there is any case such as Dimitri Payet, that before you started at West Ham, he was on the Ballon d'Or shortlist and he was killing it. You say that if it happened while you were at the player care department, you would resign because it would mean that you haven't made your job in the best ways, because he wanted to leave West Ham. So you really think that if a player care staff does a good job, there is no risk, or at least you are really reducing massively this kind of risk of a player like says that they want to leave?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's I do believe that actually. It's a bit of a joke comment, but it's true because, like, we have often a limited budget to solve problems. If you talk about Dimitri, I don't know him, I never met him, but he's a French guy. It's France and England are neighbors, living in London, one of the most international cities in the world. We have a very diverse community here. Whatever reason he was finding, we could have found a better reason, a better solution, a better community. We could have found other problems because ultimately he left for similar money to what he got bought for. But he was a top player in the world. He should have been sold for 5 what we bought him for. And so, yeah, I would say that, let alone offer my resignation, I'd probably be fired and I would probably expect it. So, you could say, oh, it's not always possible to stop it. But when a player of that level is saying he's not happy, then for me, it's not an excuse. I mean, like, yeah, I think there are players who thrive in much smaller cities and much more difficult environments, that succeed. So for me, I think it was a sad way to end things. And if I was head of player at that time, I would expect to lose my job.
And Hugo, we've already discussed like budget constraints throughout our conversation, like fair play and this kind of stuff. And you say that there is this myth that player care departments need a large budget, while you argue that the best initiatives can be done for little or no cost. For example, creating a photo sheet for players during onboarding, something you've done before, can add real value and with almost no cost. So could you share more about how that works in practice and share more simple, low cost initiatives that could make a big impact?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this player care isn't expensive to do because a lot of the times the players are spending their own money. So, you mentioned the photo sheet, which is just a piece of paper or a document with everyone's faces and names so that everyone knows who's in the training ground, who's speaking to them, what their name is, what their job is. But yeah, it could be as easy as speaking to the local embassy if you've got a South Korean player, getting in touch with the embassy and saying, look, what support do you have for South Koreans moving to England? It could be that you find a local member of staff in the club who has the same family, same nationality as another one of the players. Okay, well, this Ukrainian family works in the commercial department. They can take you for dinner, and speak in your own language and eat your own food because it's hard work speaking in a different language. When I go on holiday to France, and I have to think in French, it's very hard. I'm tired at the end of the day because I have to think all the time. So it's nice just to speak to people in English. So, I understand how that works. And so we're just trying to have a bit of thought and a bit of care that really helps, not by spending money, but by thinking and caring about someone can make a big difference.
And Even though player care can lead to greater efficiency, you believe it should focus on building relationships, not just targeting efficiency, which is often the approach clubs take. For example, I think a good example that you give, if a player and his wife ask for new blinds, instead of just sending someone over, you'd take the time to visit them if possible. Once this approach led to the wife sharing concerns about their son's learning difficulties, something that wouldn't have come up if you'd only addressed the blinds. So I think this is a good example to show how you could try to take the right time, right, to understand the real challenges that families face, because otherwise maybe this is also linked with what you were mentioning before about that team of more than 10 people, because if you are just focused on efficiency and solving simple issues, maybe you are kind of missing the big picture, like that can have even more impact on performance indirectly, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about understanding what's the right time to be a bit slower and build that relationship rather than getting things done. But yeah, that's a good example. And I think, sometimes it's too easy or to focus on, well, how many things have I fixed today? Well, if you fix one major problem that's very important to someone, that's better than fixing 10 speeding tickets, or parking tickets. So yeah, absolutely. It's about trying to balance the need to build a relationship, but also valuing your own time, making sure that the other 24 players are getting looked after in the right way as well. So, yeah, it's a balancing act, as a lot of player care is.
And speaking about balance, Hugo, you claim that player care needs to balance also clubs' needs and players' priorities. If it's skewed in either direction, it doesn't work. So, for instance, tell players that they don't have to do appearances or other duties, and if you tell them this, the club, of course, will get mad, will get furious. But at the same time, like if you focus too much on the club, and the players won't probably open up to you because they wouldn't trust you fully. So we know that it's difficult to find that balance, but also here, would you have any advice, or how do you advise people to manage this kind of balance?
Yeah, I mean, it's the key of player care really is that club player balance, and it's one where when people lose their jobs, it's because they are too far on the player side. Which it sounds crazy, it's player care, but ultimately you're a club employee and you're there to help the club. And you can argue with the club, you can push back on the club, but ultimately you've got to side with the club, most times. And so it's about trying to understand like what's important for your leadership in the club, what's important for the owners, what's important for the manager. And yeah, if you can move it and help the players out, then sure. But ultimately, your job is not to stop the players doing their job or to get them out of things they don't want to do. It's to make sure that they have the support they need to be able to do their job fully. So, yeah, I think I've seen a number of staff make mistakes and pay the price for it, and it's about trying to make sure that you stay on the right side of that balance at all times.
And arriving to the final stage of the conversation, you left West Ham in December 2020 to launch the Player Care Group, helping clubs build player care departments from scratch. While you see England as ahead of the curve, you describe it as ahead of a very low performing industry, with many great clubs, as you already mentioned throughout our conversation, still lacking the structure. Your business has two focuses. So, B2B, working with clubs and leagues worldwide to analyze and improve player care. And on the other hand, B2C, offering education courses for those in or entering the industry. You believe player care works best when built into an organization. So, your goal in the end of the day is to equip clubs with the tools to support their athletes rather than managing the players yourself, right? And sometimes this can be a bit of a tough balance, because I know that, for instance, I'm not sure if it's the case today, but you're still in the group, in the WhatsApp group of Brentford. So sometimes you are just seeing that things are not done maybe 100% in a correct way, right? So yeah, just let me know a bit about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I've now left the group, so that's a relief to be out of that group. But no, it's yeah, you look, you're always trying to grow, things and make them better. I have a unique experience, which is running player care at three different Premier League clubs. No one else has that experience, and now through my teaching and my other consulting work, we see clubs from across the world. I get to see what they do, and every time I give something, as I said earlier, I take some knowledge or I take some information or I see a way to do things. So, yeah, we can absolutely help improve clubs, and we do that across the world. But it's also not, I don't know everything. There are other people doing great work out there, and there are other people doing it in different ways as well, which is not necessarily wrong or right. It's just different. And so clubs need to pick, speak to different people and get, the person that they feel is right to help them as much as possible.
And the idea in the future is to expand to other sports and also other countries, right?
Yeah, so we're already in other countries. Other sports we'll see. We've had a couple of conversations, but there's so much left in football to do that I'm not rushing to work in other sports yet. But certainly, like, we're always interested to learn, and I have a number of my consultants with the company are from other sports because it means I can learn from them. But yeah, there's 4,500 professional clubs in the world. If I get 10% of them, then I will retire a happy man. So there's a lot of work yet to be done.
More recently, what started as a 6 week player care cover for the January transfer window of 2023 ended with a multi department restructure, 9 months full time and 4 months as a consultant at Brentford. What did that experience exactly brought you that was different from the others?
Yeah, it was nice. I mean, I had been out of the industry for maybe 2 years as doing the role directly, and Brentford offered me an opportunity to come in and sort of refresh. So that was great. I helped them out in a time where they needed someone quite urgently. I managed to reconnect and refresh myself as well. So it was good. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. It was probably the best club I've worked at. I really enjoyed the people there, enjoyed the project. And it was nice to get back in, but I'm happy to be out again now. It's so intense. It's so much time and hours spent, and a lot of traveling, and so it was a great experience. And it was nice for me as well for the first time to be able to look at other departments other than player care and team operations, which is my background. But we work with the kit and equipment department. We help with player appearances, all this other stuff that maybe I hadn't done as much before. And yeah, I think it was a really fantastic opportunity.
And Hugo, speaking about skills, because we didn't manage to arrive to this point of the conversation, when you posted a job for 2 assistants at West Ham, over 1,000 people applied. Just one example of how desirable football clubs' roles are, especially, of course, those involving close contact with the first team. In player care, success is often driven by personality, as you put it. So, charisma, integrity, hard work, creativity, and strong people skills are should be important. While languages can also help, you don't find them essential. Sometimes you find that clubs are seeking for the wrong candidates because, for example, for a championship club having almost no foreign players, just maybe a couple of Scandinavian players, probably you don't really need anything else than English. And if you ask for too much, like 5 languages, you will probably overlook for excellent candidates. So yeah, just wanted to have your feedback, have your thoughts on this kind of seeking for the right candidates and the necessary skills.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the recruitment side of the job. I really like to meet new people and give people a chance. So I enjoy going through CVs and giving people a chance, but a lot of clubs don't. It's a lot of clubs, it's too much work. So it's a service we offer with the company now. I try and look for personality. So I like to read cover letters rather than CVs. I like to see why do they want to work there? What's driving them? What motivates them? If they say they're a really good problem solver and people person, I'm much more interested in that than they've worked at another club or worked in sport before, because I think that's stuff you can't teach. But yeah, it just takes time really to look through it. We help clubs with recruitment now, and it's good because it allows me to kind of say to the club, look, you might want this, but you don't need this. This is the three things I think you need, but this is a nice to have. And if we get someone who does that, that's great. Like I've worked in 4 or 5 different cities in my life. I didn't know any of these cities really before I moved there. But if you come from a football club, you can learn the city very quickly, but you can't learn the people skills very quickly. You can't learn the ability to engage with high profile athletes very quickly. So I would rather have the ability to work with high net worth people or with celebrities, rather than having a knowledge of the certain town that I'm in, because that's you can learn that. So yeah, I think it's about trying to spend the time to do it, be open minded, and be willing to question things, and be willing to appoint someone different to you. I think is really important as well.
There is a something you say that I think is really important, because you say that as long as you can work harder than other people and you can look at things differently, then you think that's a key skill to have. So would you find that these two skills, like hardworking skill and also like this creativity side, they are really a key for the role?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know when I said that, but probably would say now more it's working smart. Like, you can work for 20 hours a day, but if you're just doing the wrong work, then it's not necessarily helpful. But I definitely think thinking differently is really important to say. When you meet a player and everyone goes, "Oh, he's really difficult," and then you say, well, "Why is he difficult? What's difficult about him?" And then you start speaking to him and finding out he's struggling with the language or he's struggling with the communication style. Okay, let's try and unlock that. So I think that's really important. So yeah, maybe not working. Yeah, you need to work hard. Of course you do. It's a very tough industry, but actually working smart and doing the right work at the right time is probably more important.
And Hugo, just before the last question, like looking ahead, since proactiveness is key in your view, you believe that the next frontier lies in tailoring support to each player's individual's needs. At one point, you were working on a data model to track how player well-being evolves within clubs, measuring the impact of the player care department and identifying trends. Maybe this is already related with what you spoke about before, both within squads and across clubs. Interestingly, a similar approach is already being used in Australia's NRL, which you see as a benchmark for player care, with league mandated standards that, in your view, are ahead of anything you've seen in other sports. So I just wanted to catch up kind of where does the development of your data model stands, because it seems that it could be a game changer in helping clubs see why player care can really be a key differentiator. So yeah, just wanted to have your feedback on this one.
Yeah, so we launched, we call it Player Care Pro, and it launched in April 2024. Yeah, it took a lot of work to get there, and I think it's been a valuable tool for a lot of clubs. And yeah, it's available now, so people can look at the website and dive into it. And I think what it allows clubs to do is see how they compare in the player care compared to other clubs, and it gives them ideas on how to improve as well. So it's like consulting without a consultant, and it allows them to grow themselves in their own time.
Do you think the Premier League could follow Australian NRL with this kind of standard mandated model?
Maybe they've done it in the academies already. I don't know if the first teams will
Okay.
happen, but I think it's sometimes easier if the clubs see it as a competitive advantage against each other. Once everyone has something, then it's not interesting anymore. So maybe it works better, having a bit more competitive. But yeah, I've not heard of any changes to the rules that are coming about making it mandatory in the first teams. But yeah, that would be great if it does happen.
And Hugo, even if you think that it's harder to directly link it to performance, do you think that player care in the next like 5 to 10 years could have that huge rise, such as data analysis, nutrition, sports science? Are you confident about it, or do you think it's tough?
Uh, I think it's already had a big growth in the last couple of years. I mean, I hope so. But yeah, I think we need to keep showing clubs and leaders in clubs why it helps them do their job, and I think it will continue. I think it's probably hard to see it the same as data analysis because it's not as directly linked. But yeah, I'm confident. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be working in it. So I'm hoping that yeah, the success will continue to come.
Last but not least, would you have any recommendations for a book, series, documentary, or film about football in general, or I mean, even player care, of course?
I mean, my favorite book, which is kind of related but not directly related, is a book called Unreasonable Hospitality by a guy called Will Guidara. He's an American restaurateur, and he built up a restaurant empire. But his number one restaurant became rated the best restaurant in the world, and it's a really interesting look at how to go above and beyond to try and blow people's minds and give them something they weren't expecting. And I really enjoyed that book, and I got a lot out of it. So yeah, Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara is a book that I would highly recommend.
Really cool suggestion. And Hugo, thanks a lot for the relevant insights you've provided throughout the conversation and for being here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
For everyone that wants to follow the conversations about sports management, you can just subscribe Folha Seca channel on YouTube, and also subscribe the audio streaming platforms such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Cheers.